you actually teach also all the way up to the romantic. I guess a question everyone would have is, if you get really good at Renaissance counterpoint, can that apply to your understanding of tonal music in forward generations?
I think, of course. So it's like learning Latin will help you understand French or Italian. And the same, also the romantic music is very different, but in the origins of this music, we have the voice leading principles from the Renaissance and from the basso continuo. And it is, I prefer to focus on the common things. That's what you learn from an oral culture as well, not focusing on certain fashions that a certain time brings, a way to do a cadence or things like this that can be very specific, but also to look at the master lines of this musical language that remain somehow constant.
Can you give some examples? What things would remain constant among the different eras?
Well, I remember my teacher, Markus Jans, talking about this when he explained what he called the PIP principle. Or in German it sounds like PIP Prinzip. The music begins with a perfect consonant, continues with an imperfect consonant, and ends again with a perfect consonant. And this principle, he said, you can follow it from Machaut to Mahler.
Cool.
And that's obviously with differences. What is a perfect sound in Machaut is different from Mahler. Just the perfect consonant is only, and later in basso continuo, the root chord as the perfect one and the sixth chord as the imperfect one, and so on. There are obviously lots of gradual changes, but there is a huge continuity at the end, I think.
I'm so interested in the commonality of tonal music, and in the sense that, there are different eras, but I really feel if you know if you're such a musical person, it seems like you can just jump into any style and at least have something interesting to say.
Well, I think that composers of different times, for example, Bach was studying Palestrina and could do something with his language and could imitate his style or report Palestrina's music, and Mendelssohn was studying Bach. I remember some years ago with my vocal ensemble, I did a program beginning in the time of Banchois and looking at his compositions, then at Ockeghem, who was his pupil, and at Josquin, who was the pupil of Ockeghem, and so on, until Bach. And you find there, the style changes, obviously, but gradually. Lots of things they learn from the master continue. I think in such a program you can hear really this line. But of course, we hear the innovations. I think the point is we have heard a music history that is, we deal with some kind of drawers. We have the drawer of the Renaissance, and it seems that 1600 music changes fully with Monteverdi and the Seconda Pratica and so on, and the Baroque starts. And then the classical era is something fully different. But there are lots of things that don't change in such a spectacular way. And for example, researching the Spanish music of the 17th century shows you that we can go from the 16th to the 18th without such a break, with more continuity. Well, that's rather... we can see both, of course. I'm not saying that the music is always the same, of course.
Of course.
But I'm just saying that the focus of music history on the detail and on the radical changes at certain moments should at least be compensated by looking at the things that remain constant as well.
Can you talk about the different levels of ear training and sight singing and improvised counterpoint? So there's the beginning levels, the kind of things you would work on there, and then what's at the end? Are you guys singing fugues or something like that?
Well, this is a big question for me, a big challenge in my lessons, because we try to do two things. We try to go from the Renaissance to the Romantic era, to cover all of these periods, and to develop the skills from the easiest to the most difficult things. And that's not easy to combine. And we remain at the end somehow a bit amateurs in all of these things, because if you would focus more on Bach, then you will not have the time to study contrapuntualmente, for example. But there is a tradition in the Schola of that as well. Hans-Peter Weber, who was teaching for 40 years in the Schola, most of them of these years, ear training, he developed how can I say, a structure of the studies in six levels, from the easiest to the most difficult, and we try to put the people at the level that they need, and so according to the abilities as well.
What are the levels then? So there's 6 levels. Could you briefly describe what each level entails?
Well, I would say level A, we deal with one voice dictations, with 2 voice dictations, which don't contain too many difficult jumps, and we start relating the melody to the bass. And I don't deal so much with chordal structures yet. Yeah? But I introduce them, and in a level B, they will work much more on how the middle voices fill in that. And in level C, the examples will be a bit more difficult about the same thing, and so on. Also, we try to let the people begin at the level that they can, that it's not too easy for them and not too difficult. And that's something very different from Satzlehre, from a subject which has more to do with knowledge, in the sense that you can have people of different levels somehow in the same group. According to my experience in ear training, if that's too easy or too difficult for them, then you don't have a chance.
So do you also teach counterpoint, or is improvised counterpoint a separate class?
Well, I teach contrapuntualmente, improvised counterpoint. I was normally, you said at the beginning, I teach historische Satzlehre. The point is, I did that for 1 year for a substitution. But normally I am, since I went to Schola, I specialized on the ear training and contrapuntualmente. So I teach contrapunto through the singing and not through the writing normally.
I think one topic that has really become really interesting is this separation between counterpoint and harmony. And a lot of listeners know about, there's this dichotomy between the vertical Roman numerals and harmonic functions, and then there's also a more horizontal contrapuntal thinking. I'm not sure it's so black and white like that, but what's your opinion on harmony versus counterpoint? Are they 2 separate subjects? Are they the same subject? I'd love to get your take on this.
Well, I think the tradition of Harmonielehre is that of somehow rationalizing the polyphony, in a sense that you can reduce the harmonic functions to few chords, to few basic chords. It's a tradition that comes somehow from Rameau, but that especially in the 19th century led to lots and lots of different Harmonielehren. And somebody who was a guest in your show, Ludwig Holtmeier, has written very clearly about that. And while counterpoint, today people have the impression counterpoint is something for a very advanced level. So let's say harmony teaches you, begins with relatively clear chords, and everybody understands what is a tonic and a dominant, and counterpoint is for experts. And my approach is very different. So once you have 2 voices, you have already counterpoint. And counterpoint is much more fundamental. Yeah. And if you approach this like I do with the Dolzaina, like in oral culture, just add a second voice, counterpoint is not an extremely difficult thing. And in fact, I would like to comment that I'm writing a book about ear training together with Florian Vogt. And in this book, we take a structure in 3 parts, beginning with melody, with all elements involving hearing melodies and singing melodies, about the pitches, the rhythms, and so on. The second part of the book deals with counterpoint. It is not contrapuntualmente exactly, but it is rather focusing on the 18th century. And the third part about harmony, from the background of the counterpoint, lets you find out what the middle voices add to this two-voice frame, to this Außenstimmensatz, what you say in German is the outer voices as the frame. Well, it's an approach you probably know from Gerdingen and so on, how the middle voices fill in this two-voice counterpoint. So that's, for me, at the end, once you have music for many voices, counterpoint and harmony are two sides of the same medal.
Is harmony and counterpoint, are we starting to see them kind of merge in some way?
Well, the point is if we are merging them now, or if they originated and not as two different things. I think the concept of harmony is much more modern. The concept of harmony in the sense of the studying of the chords.
Well, when you go to the Romantic period, you take your method, and do you find any difficulty in applying your process to later Romantic music, or do you find it fits like a glove?
Well, obviously, you cannot use just the same tools at all. Yeah? You have to adapt, because I was emphasizing the common things, but there are differences. But for the Romantic, I depart from Förster a lot. When you work with Förster, with his with Arabic numbers for the scale degrees, and you approach Brahms from this approach, there's almost anything that you cannot explain or understand from this perspective. But I would also like to comment that in certain moments I do also artificial things, like there are canons by Brahms in which, for example, the soprano begins, the alto follows a fourth lower, and then the tenor follows another fourth lower, and so on. And I have been doing these pieces in my lessons with no score. Yes, with one person singing the original soprano, one person has the score, and the others have to follow like in contrapuntualmente. So the tools, once you have a canon, especially for ear training, it can be very useful to let the people do it from what they hear and not only analyzing the score. So you can see, the point is that Brahms as well was studying the old counterpoint and was sending exercises to Joachim per letter that they had to solve each other. They were exchanging this kind of Renaissance-like exercises. So there is a connection as well.